which conspiracy theories were later proven to be true. Story 1. Tobacco companies knew about the dangers of smoking and withheld and falsified data for decades, probably condemning thousands of people to deaths from cancer and other smoking-related diseases. There's also been real revisionist history done by the tobacco companies. I hear people constantly ask why the lawsuits were settled for so much, because everyone knew smoking was bad for you. Not very clearly, the lawsuits are about how tobacco companies knew and actively led campaigns to mislead people. They bribed doctors to tell people smoking wasn't harmful. Story 2. NSA mass surveillance program on US citizens, Allies defense apparatus, individual heads of friendly states, all while collaborating with big telecom companies to bulk gather data and pass it on to NSA in-house tools. It is flabbergasting how easily all this was swept under the rug in the name of terrorism by passing FISA law that not only protected NSA, but also telecom companies too, retroactively too. Do people really know the tools NSA has? It's all very, very, very cool and very, very, very scary. Look up tailored access operations. These people are legendary. Story 3. Snowden. Before that, we probably all assumed the government was probably spying on us, but to what extent was unknown, and to think the answer was everyone, all the time, anytime, was in conspiracy theory territory. Then Snowden was like, no, yeah, they know just about anything they could ever want to know about everyone. And whatever you do digitally is completely at their disposal, as well as plenty of things you do in the physical world. Workarounds like Tor just slow them down or deter, but if they really want you in particular, they can get around that too. Story 4. I don't know about a theory as much as pretty much fact. MLB ignored the mass use of steroids in baseball, which peaked in the 90s and early 2000s, because it was stimulating ticket sales following the players' strike in 1994. Where public opinion and interest in baseball was dwindling. It gave them a quick rebound, and they only gave it attention when the health effects came to light. More, and Congress got involved in the mid-2000s. Story 5. I remember back in like 2017, I was serving a table, and I was joking with the dude at the table about how my husband told me he wanted to go shopping for winter boots. And literally, as soon as I opened FB, literally every ad was for winter boots. The guy was laughing along, but the girl got very quiet and seemed perturbed, so I took the hint and left quickly. As I was leaving, I overheard her say, "You don't really believe that crap, do you?" And he was like, "What? That companies are listening to your voice to market things?" And she was like, "Yes." It pisses me off so much when people talk about that because it's just not true, and that would be such an invasion of privacy. Like, this lady was mad. I've always wondered how she's doing in 2025, knowing that not only is it true, it's normalized and expected now, and a lot of people have a smart home that knows what they need for groceries before they do. Story 6. Mountain Meadows Massacre, Joseph Smith's conviction for scrying with rocks, and his very early conning of New Englanders for cash, his fleeing the jurisdiction after his Kirtland, Ohio money cons, and escapades there, and then his polygamy and his shooting his way out of jail during his drunken, planned prison break. Denied, lied about, covered up, the whispers on the winds that anyone who believed in these conspiracies were Satan's minions, the pretense, the holy rituals devised to absolve those who participated of their sins, blamed on persecution and meddling outsiders, called tall tales and malicious lies, when most of the whistleblowers were born in the covenant or were true blue Mormon converts themselves. All true, all factual, all proven, all documented, all corroborated, and later all admitted to by church authorities, after decades, or in several cases after a century, of punishing anyone who dared speak of them. It's not paranoid if they really are out to get you, and it's not slandering if what you say is true. Story 7. The idea that genetic services like 23andMe may be selling records to the government and/or insurance companies. There have been cases of criminals being caught with genetic information like this, citation needed, so it's not much of a stretch that other agencies could acquire it as well. They aren't selling it, rather people freely share it, and the investigators search it. The most notable case is the Golden State Killer, where they entered DNA recovered from the scenes and searched it for relatives. They found several distant relatives and used other information, such as genealogical records, approximate age, and location of crimes to further narrow the suspect pool. Then, based on that, you can get a warrant for a DNA sample. Story 8. Black helicopters. In the 90s, these were the equivalent of tinfoil hats. Conspiracy nuts would talk endlessly about totally silent black helicopters, modified Black Hawks, that could move around at high altitudes almost undetected. The thing is, they were real the whole time. When the US government sent in SEAL Team 6 to bag bin Laden, they publicly announced that ST-6 dropped in on 2 silent black helicopters and had to blow one up to stop the technology from being recovered. That is a thing they just said with their full chest, like it wasn't a big deal. Maybe it isn't, but I just imagined a whole lot of conspiracy guys fist pumping because a thing they've been saying for 20 years was proved true. Story 9, Martha Mitchell told the truth about Nixon's Watergate break-in crime, but initially was called crazy, a label applied by Nixon and her own husband John Mitchell, who was Nixon's attorney general, close friend and crinkly co-conspirator. In uptight mid-1960s, Martha often overshadowed John, being famous for her vocal honesty, unfiltered outspokenness, loudness, blunt, sassy, and funny quips, with a disarming southern flamboyant style that was usually loved but sometimes hated by people with something bad to hide. Originally, she supported Nixon in his campaign, but his own actions repelled her to the point she was openly criticizing him, crossing a line Nixon couldn't accept. Nixon and Mitchell plotted to silence her when she talked about the Watergate hotel break-in in her characteristically candid way, which was so shocking people initially didn't believe her. Being Nixon was still believed and very popular. Story 10, the Titanic split in half before it sank. Although many survivors claimed it did, there were others that claimed it didn't. Cunard and nautical engineers denied it, indicating there was no way that could have happened. I have no idea why. What difference would it make? Yet, until Ballard found the wreck, there was a lot of denial and debate as to whether it went down in one piece. Also, the lights were on until the ship sank completely. The workers quite literally ended themselves to keep the power working so people could see where they were going. What's wild is there's still deniers that the ship broke. Like, y'all, we have actual full images, well, a bunch of photos stitched together to form the big photo, of the Titanic wreckage, and it's clearly in multiple pieces. That photo is actually strangely more haunting than the paintings and pictures of the Titanic above water. I swear it's cursed. Story 11, the American government had an active UFO program, spending significant resources to investigate NHI and now UAPs. I am confident that the next one will be that. The American government and others have an active crash retrieval and reverse engineering program of UAPs and NHI tech that has been hidden from the general population and is run in waived, unacknowledged special access programs that Congress is not even briefed on, in collaboration with aerotech companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, etc. It sure is quite crazy to be alive. Story 12, the financial market is completely rigged by market makers and hedge funds. Rules upon rules, regulations upon regulations, special jargon to keep things complicated and vague, so people don't understand how the markets really work. You think these billionaires are really this good at investing with algorithms and supercomputers? Nah, they use every rule in the playbook and crime to come on top. Look up PFOF, payment for order flow, and shorting or dark pool, exchange where orders don't hit the open markets and can push the price up down depending where they want the price to be, and many, many more. It's all fugazi, smoke and mirrors. The market is messed up and rigged against retail. How else can politicians make hundreds of millions of dollars while earning 6 digits? Everyone who believes they did it by themselves wants to live in an illusion. Story 13, surprised the Hinkley groundwater contamination class action lawsuit hasn't been mentioned? Some might also argue the Flint water crisis falls under some level of conspiracy or suspected cover-up. Middletown is another recent documentary about a group of high school students and their teacher in upstate New York, who initially began documenting themselves in the 90s as they investigated toxic waste being dumped in a nearby landfill and uncovered a larger conspiracy. Outraged and motivated, Fred and his students set out to shine a spotlight on this crime, and Middletown depicts them interviewing everyone and anyone associated with the dumping ground, from residents to town officials to bigger media outlets, such as the editor-in-chief of the local newspaper, whose anger at being interrogated about his disinterest in their findings is the first of many instances in which the kids ruffle feathers. Getting anyone to confess to their misdeeds was a Herculean task, but their toil did turn up shocking revelations about the design of the landfill. Shamefully, it was built on the aquifer that provides Middletown with drinking water, and about the intricate ties between the waste disposal industry, town and state government, big business, and the Mangelli crime family. Year after year, Fred and his kids attempted to make people see that something nefarious was taking place, and Middletown demonstrates that they eventually made enough noise to elicit the attention of the New York Times in 60 minutes. As Fred now says, the entire experience was like something out of a bad movie, complete with their very own deep throat in the figure of the enigmatic auntie, Mr. B, and he reminisces about it with not simply affection, but pride at having stirred these teens to look beyond themselves and seek justice. Story 14, The Cabal of Tobacco Companies in John Grisham's book, The Runaway Jury. In this book, a man dies of lung cancer, and his widow sues the company that made the cigarettes he smoked exclusively all his life. A cabal of fictional tobacco companies gets together to buy the jury, but a rogue juror threatens their plans. They went to make a movie of it, because the movie would inadvertently paint cigarettes in a bad light. The real tobacco companies banded together to campaign against the film. The film ended up getting made, but the film is about a guy who dies from gun violence, and his widow sues the gun manufacturer instead. The movie is actually very good, with Gene Hackman as the head of the cabal, and John Cusack as the rogue juror. They not only made the change work for the movie, I think it worked out better. It's just funny that the conspiracy that John Grisham invented became true. Story 15, in order to justify its existence and considerable budget, the CIA has actively cultivated a reputation as being behind all sorts of regime changes, particularly in Latin America, effectively claiming credit whenever the new regime was friendly to American interests. In truth, they often wasted untold amounts of money on regime change activities to no avail, only for some colonel no one had heard of the previous week to overthrow the government based on factors and politics that could be or were in place regardless of the CIA's actions. Story 16, UFOs or UAPs. The sad part is that when you look deeply into the topic, you'll realize that the concept of American democracy was over 80 years ago. The concept of American freedom of press? They were complicit with the cover-up. Fortunately, through the Freedom of Information Act, researchers have been able to provide the receipts. Carl Sagan once said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Well, they've got the evidence now. Even some of the department heads, physicists, and researchers in charge of reverse engineering these craft are coming forward and openly talking about it. Story 17, people were convinced their phones or smart devices were listening to them. They just talked to someone about something. Then the next time they go online, they're bombarded with ads related to what they were literally just talking about. I always shrugged it off and insisted they probably posted something similar online and were data mined because they didn't set their profiles to private, or that they Googled something on that topic. Yeah, Apple got sued for that, and there's a class action lawsuit they've got to pay out. Pretty certain they aren't the only company who's in the same boat. I'm assuming Amazon. I know before those lawsuits, Zuckerberg had to testify before Congress, and people noticed he had attachments on his phone which plugged the microphone and covered the camera. Now you can buy such attachments online. Story 18, Roswell, New Mexico weather balloon crash, was a story to cover up the alien crash. The remains, including one surviving alien, were moved to what became Top Secret Area 51. The Philadelphia experiment made a movie about this. They were trying to make shops invisible to radar. Instead, the entire ship teleported somewhere. It completely disappeared. When it reappeared a few minutes later, it was a mess. Guys were stuck in the ship deck. Some were just stuck in through the ship wall. The Russian sleeping experiment. They tried to play this off as a hoax, but there's photos and too much compelling evidence to the contrary. Eugenics on developmentally disabled and mentally ill. When Hitler was being called out for being a monster, he said, "I got the idea from the state of Virginia." Evidence of visitors from outside of the Milky Way, our galaxy guys jumped overboard. Some died before, but not all. Then it was shut down and they attempted to cover it up. Story 19. It's wild how many of these conspiracies start with powerful institutions lying to the public until they get caught red-handed decades later. Between Big Tobacco's cover-up, COINTELPRO's sabotage of activists, and the NSA's dystopian surveillance, the real pattern is how often whistleblowers and leaks are the only things holding power accountable. And yet people still get mocked for being paranoid when questioning authority. Maybe we should be asking why that reflex exists in the first place. The most depressing part, these are just the ones we know about. Story 20, that there is in fact a massive cover-up spanning decades to discredit UFO claims and conversations, to the point that it's objective verifiable fact that companies like Lockheed Martin are in on it. Now, whether those UFOs are extraterrestrial or just top secret American tech, that's another question. But based on what folks like Chuck Schumer have said, there's a good chance there's a much more efficient power source, again likely made by the US, these craft are using that is being denied access to the rest of the population, and that's so insanely messed up. Story 21. Most of the conspiracies you see in this thread won't be conspiracies. They weren't insinuated or perpetuated by any people before they were revealed. Most of the time it is corporation or government turns out to be doing insert bad thing here, and then everyone goes, oh well that's a conspiracy. No it wasn't. No one was speculating it was happening before it was revealed. That's why most actual conspiracy theories are reliant on being about things that can't be proven nor disproven by their standard of evidence. That way it can live forever in their minds. Story 22. In 1990 South Korea, there was a suspicion that there was some funny business going on to prevent a guy named Kim Dae-jung from being elected as president. Basically, he was a left-leaning politician who favored a more reconciliatory tone towards North Korea. The South Koreans in charge obviously didn't like that, but surprisingly to some, neither did the North Koreans in charge. To legitimize their power, North Korea needed a South Korean enemy to fight against. Kim Dae-jung's friendlier approach would threaten that, so South Korean and North Korean officials cooked up a scheme. They met secretly in China, where South Korea gave money to North Korea to create border disruptions whenever Kim Dae-jung got too popular during election campaigns. This became so routine that South Korean citizens nicknamed it the North Wind. It was a conspiracy theory that North Korea would do something to sabotage Kim Dae-jung whenever he got too popular. Eventually, a South Korean spy blew it wide open. He was posing as a businessman from South Korea who was interested in filming advertisements in the North, meeting North Korean officials in China. In reality, he was working for South Korean intelligence to gather proof and details of North Korea's nuclear program. During one of those stays in China, he happened to be in the same hotel in proximity to the North and South Koreans in the scheme and confirmed the scheme's existence with his North Korean colleagues. He gathered enough proof of what was happening to threaten to go public if they kept going with it. They didn't, and without the North Wind, it resulted in Kim Dae-jung winning the election. Kim Dae-jung eventually became known as South Korea's greatest president and won the Nobel Peace Prize for his North Korea strategy. Story 23, that your phone's microphone is constantly hot and it's listening for keywords to target advertising. The most glaring instance where this happened to me was when I walked into a colleague's office. He had just gotten a standing desk, but one that goes on top of his existing desk rather than a standalone pun model. That's important to note, I said. Nice standing desk, when did you get that? Thanks, just today, he replied. That was literally all that was said about the desk. We talked about work-related stuff, and as I walked out and checked my phone, there was an ad on Facebook for that exact model of standing desk. I have never owned one, wanted one, or Googled one before. Yet there it was on my feed. Tin foil hat be damned, they listen in. Story 24, my conspiracy theory. Facebook purposely attempts to ruin people's relationships because the drama gets more views and more views sell more ads. Several years ago, they introduced a feature so that your comments on other pages would show up in your friends' feeds. So if you're secretly an atheist and you comment on some atheist page, it shows up in your devout Southern Baptist Grandma Muriel's timeline, even though it's a conversation that has nothing to do with her and there's no reason for it to be. As a result, Facebook outs you to your family, and Grandma is typing away at all the evil Satanists trying to corrupt her grandson. And if you comment on a public post, it's unavoidable. You used to be able to control who could see your comments even on public posts by other pages. But at the same time Facebook introduced their tattletale feature, they took that ability away. Now, if they were to stumble across the same page, they'd be able to see your comment. But after that change, Facebook started pointing everybody you know directly to it. Not to mention, the privacy settings are difficult to find, difficult to understand, and with each passing year gives you less and less control over who sees what. Story 25. I have long argued to friends and family that Barack Obama may have been a CIA operative sometime in between college and being a community organizer in Chicago. Bear with me. After graduating from Columbia in 1983, Obama went to work for a company called Business International Corporation, a company that is known to have been used as a CIA front in the past. There is little information available about this time in Obama's life. The CIA was actively recruiting at that point in history and would have been very interested in a young black man with an Ivy League education and ties to Indonesia and Africa. The information would most likely still be classified, but it could also have helped his rapid accession in politics at such a young age. After nursing this theory for a while, I finally Googled it, and sure enough, loads of websites tout similar theories. Some of it is convincing, not the stuff about him being a CIA chrononaut who fought Russians on the moon. That angle is less convincing. Story 26, the Laurel Canyon conspiracy. Basically, if you look at the counterculture revolutionaries in the music industry in the 60s, most of them were the children of military intelligence people. So the theory is that the free love, lots of drugs movement they inspired was done intentionally to distract the youth from a full-scale revolution. The thought was if the angry youth of the mid to late 60s were too high and getting laid all the time, they would stop caring as much about societal ills and then basically sleepwalk through the 70s, which they did. I stumbled upon this when I was reading up on Jim Morrison and how his father was the one who called in the fake strike at the Gulf of Tonkin that kicked off the Vietnam War, and which was shown later to have been a false flag. Turns out, a lot of his contemporaries were also children of highly placed military people with ties to intelligence. Strange that they all wound up in Laurel Canyon as part of the same movement. Story 27, the oil and coal industries invested heavily in killing off nuclear power as an attractive alternative. These days, we have reactor designs many times safer than other methods of generating power, and the waste issue is something that could be fixed with sufficient investment. Not even a matter of these days. Even taking into account disasters like Chernobyl, estimated around 4,000 premature deaths, and Fukushima, 600, nuclear power is incredibly safe compared to coal's 5,000 accidents per year. Nuclear ends 90 people per petawatt hour generated, whereas coal ends 100.000 people per petawatt hour, mainly because of lung problems worldwide. Even if we don't take into account the climate change contribution, most of those deaths are easily avoidable if we switch to nuclear. Story 28. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory at this point, but a lot of people still don't acknowledge that your internet searches and social media profiles are absolutely being used as training models by major IT companies. I was a drunk college student and had access to them to run AI training. If you still think you're off the grid, you're an idiot. Being frank, it's not a big deal if you don't have dark crap to hide. Those people are too busy building the new technological world to give a crap that you look at strange things. But don't delude yourself into thinking people don't have access to anything you do on the internet. And to further that point, privacy in public is non-existent. When you're in public, in a city, you're on camera something like every 6 minutes, more in denser areas. So don't go freaking out when someone takes your picture or films you acting like an idiot. If you have your cell phone with you, you're being tracked. How else does Google give you specific traffic congestion details in real time all over the world? Story 29. That time, the United States military conducted secret chemical testing on unsuspecting residents of a predominantly black and low-income housing complex in St. Louis. During the Cold War, example 1950s and 60s, the Pruitt-Ego housing development was one of a number of sites across the US chosen for testing where the Army would release particles of zinc-cadmium sulfide, prolonged or repeated exposure to, which can cause cancer and damage to internal organs. The official purpose of these tests was to study how an aerosol agent might spread in various environments. Ostensibly, St. Louis was selected due to its similarities to Moscow. That is a densely populated area with similar architectural characteristics in some areas, accessibility to a large river, etc. The fact that the vast majority of residents being subjected to these dispersion tests were black was, of course, entirely unrelated. Then again, by the mid-1980s, the CIA would be deliberately funneling drugs into black neighborhoods all over the country. So, Story 30, the Titanic or Olympic conspiracy. It has credibility because there is photographic evidence. It's really one of the only conspiracy theories I put much belief in. The sister ships and their third counterpart, the Britannic, were owned by the White Star Line. The Olympic was put into service in June 1911. She collided with another ship, the HMS Hawk, in September of 1911, and both ships were badly damaged. The accident was a financial disaster for White Star Line, as they were found to be liable for the accident and had to pay for the damages to both ships and legal fees for court cases associated with the accident. Repairs on the Olympic took nearly 2 months, and parts intended for the Titanic, which was still being built during this time, had to be given to the Olympic instead. Only a few weeks after being returned to service, the Olympic suffered another minor incident where one of the propellers broke off and pieces intended for the Titanic were once again cannibalized. Story 31, I don't see them where I live now, but where I was living previously, there were a ton of these signs that had written signs advertising that you call the number listed and they'll pay you cash for your house. There were a few for cars too, but probably 90% of them were something along the lines of, "We buy houses for cash with the number listed." No more context than that. They were all sloppily handwritten in black marker with the phone number being the biggest thing on the sign. I fully believe that they were posted to initiate a kind of secret meeting. They'd all pop up all at once just everywhere, and then most would disappear a few weeks later, and then pop up again a month or two after that. The signs were so ugly that you'd have to be a complete idiot to think they were legit, so maybe they were just scamming and trying to trick the Nigerian prince.